Are you ready to travel back in time with me to the very beginning? Witness some atrocious riding, a ton of questionable outfit choices, and terrible quality footage, even from videos that were filmed this year? Well, you are in luck because this is the video that nobody asked for, my rather unimpressive riding journey. Buckle up, or should I say, saddle up. So I have always loved animals, but horses especially. And can I just say that I was absolutely freaking adorable as a kid? Like, look at that face, look at that outfit, look at the bacon. But anyways, now we are off topic. So I had sat on ponies at fairs or apple orchards a few times when I was really little, but I didn't actually start riding until I was 7 years old. I didn't even know what riding lessons were before I started, but luckily my lovely aunt bought me 4 as a birthday gift on my 7th birthday. But before I actually started my first lesson, I went to ride this little pony named Cassidy because my aunt's sister rode at this barn. And some of you may recognize it because this is actually Old Orchard Farm. So I had my first few lessons at this one barn, and then I switched to another where I rode for about a year. I mainly rode one pony named Holly, who was this adorable little bay mare. I remember it was always a struggle to get her trotting. She was just your typical lesson pony. I think in the entire year that I rode at this barn, I only rode other ponies twice, so it was basically just her. It was on Holly that I learned the basics of riding. I learned how to steer, how to stop and go, how to post the trot, and eventually walk off the lead, though I wasn't quite trotting off the lead yet. Eventually, this one coach came and she had a little pony that I started riding at a different barn. And that little pony was Gypsy Princess. So Gypsy, her show name was Gypsy Princess and her barn name was Gypsy. She was kind of the first pony that I really loved. She was a tiny strawberry roan mare and she was absolutely adorable, as you can see. I'm not quite sure how old Gypsy was when I was riding her. I want to say like around 10, but that's just a guess. She was around 12 hands and she was a Welsh cross. I started leasing or co-leasing her, I'm not really sure what you would call it. Basically, her owner still came and rode her sometimes, but it was mostly me, and I just rode her whenever I wanted. I didn't take lessons with her, so I just kind of learned based on my own experiences, which was definitely interesting at times. Gypsy also pulled a cart, and she could go in a western saddle, which was pretty cool. I remember one day my dad said to me, "Lindsay, what if we just raise the cavaletti so it's on the middle level?" And that's how I went over my first jump. And from then on, I just jumped all the time. I loved doing it, and I couldn't get enough of it. I didn't really know anything about jumping, other than that you have to 2-point over the jump, so that made it interesting when I started taking lessons again. Now, Gypsy was your typical pony. She was stubborn and bratty. She only cantered towards home down the long side of an arena. But she was also super safe, and she couldn't have been more perfect for teaching me to ride. And when I look back on these sunny summer days where I would just ride her and have the best time of my life, they're some of the happiest memories that I have. I also did my first ever shows on Gypsy, and we always won the presentation classes like every single time because she was just the cutest pony. This was a pole course that we did, and I think I messed it up. I think I messed up the 4 pole course guys. Like, I was forgetting my courses at shows since day 1. I rode Gypsy for about 3 years, but eventually I started outgrowing her, as kids always do. That was when I started riding Murphy, who was this very handsome chestnut gelding. He was really well-mannered, so after 3 years of riding like the stubbornest pony of all time, he felt so amazing. I was also still riding Gypsy at the time too because they were owned by the same family. This didn't last long though, as they moved away, so instead I started taking lessons back at one of the old barns that Gypsy was boarded at. So I took lessons on this lovely gelding. His name was Jenga. He was a super sweet horse and very different from Gypsy and Murphy because he was an actual horse. I think he was about 16 hands maybe, whereas the other two were just ponies. So we took it a bit slower with him. I rode him for a few months, but then one day while I was riding him, he spooked and took off galloping and then went lame. It was just a really unfortunate freak accident, but then I had no horse again. Luckily though, my coach was also a coach at a different barn, so she said she could see if there was a spot for me there. So in October of 2019, I started taking weekly lessons at the barn I'm still at today. Going into lessons, there were a lot of things that I needed to work on. For starters, I had never really been able to continuously canter around the arena because, like I said, Gypsy only ever cantered down the long sides of an arena towards home, and then she would just stop. I couldn't really tell my diagonals yet, and I had no idea what a canter lead even was. I was only jumping cross rails, and the most jumps I had ever done in a row was probably like 3. So I spent these first few months bouncing around from horse to horse, building the skills that I needed, improving my riding, and learning important lessons from each horse. My favorites were definitely Gemma and, if you can believe it, Jag. In December of 2019, I also started helping with the lesson program at my barn, which I quickly discovered that I loved doing and really helped me to come out of my shell. I love being able to make a positive difference in young riders' lives, and it's so rewarding to watch them flourish and grow and know that I was a part of that. Helping with the lesson program also got me more time in the saddle, as I got to ride any horses that weren't in a lesson each night. I still help with the lesson program today, and that's crazy to think about because that means I've been doing it for nearly 5 years now. Eventually, things were starting to come together. By this time, I had graduated to jumping small courses, but I remember thinking that jumps like these were just enormous. Things were going great, until March of 2020, when the whole world shut down. Because I was only taking weekly lessons, I wasn't able to even be around a horse, let alone ride, for months. As I'm sure you all know, this wasn't a very happy time, especially for my mother, who had to listen to me talk about horses and how much I missed them incessantly. Finally, once things calmed down a little in my area, my barn was able to open back up, with safety guidelines of course. We picked up right where we left off. I was still riding every horse under the sun, but this time the jumps were going up a little. My riding had definitely improved from when I started. In July of 2020, I began riding this horse named Wesley. Now, I didn't co-board Wesley or anything, he was just a lesson horse that I rode for like 3 months straight. But he was a 15-2 Dutch warmblood, and I believe he had shown up to 1.30 m before he was a lesson horse. He was an absolute angel. I was moved to a more advanced lesson group, and he was great for me because he taught me how to jump bigger jumps. Looking back at these rides, I realized how amazing Wesley was to do such a great job taking care of me as I learned more advanced jumping. He definitely knew what he was doing, which was good because I certainly didn't. In October of 2020, Wesley was leased out. I was really sad to see him go, at least until I found out that my barn had gotten a new lesson horse on lease. This was Levi, who was a 15-ish hand slaughterhouse rescue horse. We thought he was a quarter horse, but we didn't really know for sure because, like I said, he was a rescue. I loved Levi from the very first time I saw him in his stall, probably even from when I saw him on the list as the horse I was riding that night. Levi was a bit of a mess when I started riding him, to say the least, and it probably didn't help that I was also a mess. He couldn't pick up his right lead, and I didn't even know how to tell which lead I was on while I was riding, so I remember trying to teach my parents how to tell from the ground so that they could yell if I'd gotten it right or not. They couldn't really tell either though, so we spent a lot of time struggling. Levi was also pretty rushy to the jumps, and he was sticky with his transitions. Suffice to say, there were a lot of things we needed to work on. I lessoned with Levi for nearly 2 months until in January of 2021, my city went back into lockdown. Luckily though, this time we were able to keep riding. There weren't any lessons, but I started co-boarding Levi. This meant that I got to flat him 3 times a week, as well as exercise these lesson horses, Laddie and Baron, once a week to help keep them in shape while the lesson program was suspended. Now that I was riding Levi 3 times a week, I got a lot more practice in and we started slowly improving. He was finally picking up his right lead, but for the most part, our rides were still pretty rough. But I was literally head over heels for this horse. I loved him to death, flaws and all. So even though I had countless rides where I came off frustrated or angry, I wouldn't have traded him for anything. In February, Levi got the most hideous clip known to humankind because he was scared of the clippers, and in March, I was able to take lessons again. I spent the majority of this time just getting used to jumping him again. We weren't jumping nearly as high as I was with Wesley because Levi wasn't a seasoned schoolmaster like Wesley was. We were learning together. As summer came, we got to ride outside more, and I loved taking him on walks around the property. Levi was sassy and stubborn, but one thing he never was spooky. We had improved a lot since March, both in our courses and in our flat work. So in July of 2021, I did my first show in like 6 years on him in the 2/6 division. It was also Levi's first ever show, and he handled it so well. Our courses were still messy, but for a relatively green horse who was being piloted by me, we did alright. Though we didn't place, I was still super proud of him. It was a learning experience for both of us, and it solidified in me the knowledge that showing was something I wanted to keep doing. For the rest of the summer and into the fall, we couldn't do any more shows because of COVID. So instead, I made it my goal to work on other things, like teaching Levi to do a flying change. In October, my barn put on a Halloween show that Levi and I did. This time we actually placed, but only because there were only 3 other people in my division. We got 4th place for each class, but I knew that was going to happen, and I was determined to get a red ribbon at least once on Levi. So I seized my chance in the costume class. I wanted to go all out. So 216 hot glue sticks, 2,800 cotton balls, and 1 angry mother later, I had an oversized Jeep and a 1st place ribbon. As we got farther into the fall though, Levi was becoming more and more unhappy. He just seemed angry at the world. He started bucking and kicking out all the time when I was riding, and he was being dangerous on the ground too. I kept riding him, but eventually we realized that Levi just wasn't happy anymore, so he went back to his owners in December. I was devastated. I remember crying for hours that night. I was so upset, but it was probably for the best that he left. But to this day, I don't think I've ever loved a horse so completely as I did with Levi. I think some part of that just had to do with the fact that he was my first horse love, but there was just something about him. But life moves on, and when one door closes, another always opens. So in came Chico, not even a week later. Chico was also a rescue, so he was always a little special, shall we say. I have no idea what breed he was, but he was a chestnut gelding that was also probably around 15 hands. He was much greener than Levi, and I could tell from my very first ride on him. Because he was so green and quirky though, he was one of the horses that taught me the most. My riding improved so much while I was riding him. We were never perfect, but he was kind of a tricky horse to ride. I didn't feel even half of a connection with Chico though as I did with Levi, but I think that I wouldn't have been a fan of any horse that came after Levi. Not that I didn't love Chico or wasn't extremely grateful for him, I just wanted Levi back. I started co-boarding Chico right away. There wasn't really anything in particular that I needed to work on with Chico, he just needed more experience. He was only 7 when he came. We spent the first few months getting used to each other. Chico was spooky and flighty, and I struggled a lot with getting good distances to jumps on him. But he was a sweet boy, and I really liked him. In May, Chico went to his first ever show and was actually very well behaved, which I was astonished at because, like I said, he was really spooky and had a tendency to bolt. We did the 2-foot division and we even placed 3rd in equitation and 4th in hunter under saddle out of a group of like 20 horses. Our second show was a mess. I couldn't even get through a single course. The 3rd show was pretty good, and the 4th show again was a mess. He threw me off 3 times in the warm-up, and then the medic told me not to show anymore. But a huge part of it was my doing because my confidence was just declining throughout the last weeks of summer and the fall. It wasn't Chico's fault at all, but he just bolted on me one too many times, and I was constantly nervous while I was riding him, especially towards the end of my time on him. In November, he went home to his owner, and then I had no horse. I kept taking lessons, and I rode mainly this dark bay gelding, Morrison. Morrison is a 16-1 off-the-track thoroughbred. He can be a little quirky because he's a weird mix between kind of lazy and fast. But he's such an honest horse, and he has a heart of gold. He was a really great confidence builder. I love him. And it was good for me to be riding different types of horses after riding just Chico and Levi for 2 years. But at this point, I was only taking lessons once a week, and I was starting to really miss riding more often or even being at the barn more often. I wanted to be more involved, and buying or leasing my own horse has always been the goal, and I was ready to take a step closer to that goal. So after riding Morrison for a few months, a horse named Rocky became available for co-lease. Rocky had had a few months off and was just starting to come back into work by April, so I officially started riding him in May. Where do I even start with Rocky? He was a 16-hand Rhinelander gelding who showed under the name Rocksteady, and boy could he show. He was actually champion of his division at the Royal back in his glory days, which, if you know anything about horses, that is an amazing achievement. But aside from how stunning he was the most perfect, sweetest, and kindest horse I have ever met and will ever meet. He was truly one in a million, and every time I think of him, I still can't believe how lucky I was to have known him for even one moment. Anyways, during May and June, we got used to each other and then I took him to our first show. We came home champion of both divisions we entered, with a clean sweep of first in the Hunters. And I wasn't even surprised. With Rocky, I was never nervous, and I got to enjoy what it was like having my own horse. In August, Rocky and I went to our second show, and we did amazing at that too. And for the rest of the summer, we just had fun together. It was at this time that, due to a change in circumstances, I wasn't able to co-lease Rocky anymore. Although I was very sad, I was so grateful that I could still see him and spoil him with treats because he definitely deserved them whenever I was at the barn. I had my last ride on Rocky at the end of September, and for a moment there, I didn't know what was next in the cards for me. But then enters Zeus. Zeus is my current horse, and I love him to death. Zeus is a 17-hand Dutch warmblood that was born in the Netherlands and showed up to 1.40 m before making his way to our barn and starting his life as a hunter. I had seen him around the barn for years but never really paid much attention to him. But since then, he has been my literal dream come true. If you had told younger me that one day I would have a horse like Zeus, all to myself, I think I would have passed out from excitement. For my first month with Zeus, I didn't take any lessons because he was a little out of shape, but that was actually really helpful because I got a chance to really get to know him before we started jumping. Zeus is a really weird horse. He's very sensitive and I've always found him super lazy, lazier even than Rocky. He has a really small stride too, but somehow he makes you feel like you're still going faster than you actually are. I also found him more dependent on me as a rider than Rocky was. Around this time, I also got a job working with horses too, which helped me pay for Zeus and lessons, which I started taking at the beginning of November. One thing about Zeus is he cannot do pull work or small jumps. I don't know what it is, but he just can't figure them out. I'm sure at least some part of it is my fault, but I just find it so hilarious that he will jump pretty much anything you put in front of him, no matter the height, but as soon as the pole is on the ground, he can't do it. In the spring, I got to start jumping a little bigger with Zeus, and we decided to aim for the 2-9 division for show season. This was also my first year showing at a higher level than schooling shows, and I was really excited but also nervous, so these few months was a lot of show prep. And I can say now, after nearly a year of trying to keep a gray horse clean, as pretty as they are, grays should be bred out of existence. No more grays. Zeus also has a love for overjumping, which I find so funny, but sometimes can be hard to sit. Like, in his mind, he's still doing the 1.40s. But it makes photos so cute, and he always puts his knees up to his nose. At the beginning of May, Zeus and I went to our first show together and came home super happy with 3 second places, a third, and a fourth. It was a great start to the season, and I was so proud of us. Full season was also in full swing at the barn I worked at, so I got to learn all about handling broodmares and their babies, which was such a special experience. May also came with some pretty devastating news. Rocky had had another episode of EPM in February and was retired. It had gotten worse, so he was laid to rest on May 21st of 2024. It's safe to say he was one of the most magnificent horses I will ever meet, and he was loved by so many people. I'm glad that he is at peace now, and to this day his halter still hangs proudly at the front of the barn. In June, Zeus and I tried out our trail riding skills, and we came to the conclusion that he is better suited to the arena life. That never stopped us from trying, though. We also went to our second show, which didn't go as well as our first, but we still placed in all of our classes and got some amazing pictures. Overall, for the season so far, we were ranked 5th for the 2-9 hunters and 2nd for the 2-9 equitation. Disaster struck again, however, about a week later when Zeus went out to his field perfectly fine and came in a few hours later unable to put any weight on his front left leg. After an ultrasound, the vet diagnosed him with a sprain in his superficial tendon, which meant no more shows, no more riding, no more turnout even for weeks. She told us that a full recovery would probably be 6 months. Until then, it was hand walking, stall rests, and a slow rehab process. This was devastating, obviously, as my plans of a summer filled with riding and showing crumbled to pieces. But we still came out to the barn almost every day to groom Zeus or bathe him and spoil him as much as we could. He took stall rest very well. I was really upset for a few days, but I quickly became glad that it wasn't anything worse. But then things finally took a turn for the better. My mom got a call saying that there was a 4-year-old large pony coming to the barn and I could start riding her. Her name is Maeve. Her show name is Always on My Mind, and she is a buckskin Welsh warmblood cross. She was just a baby and needed someone to help get her some more experience before she was ready to be sold. As soon as I saw her pictures, I just fell in love with her. If you know anything about me, you know I'm a sucker for ponies, and she is just about the cutest pony you'll ever see. Being only 4, Maeve still has a lot to learn, but she has the best brain and she's so easy to work with. She's not spooky, never misbehaves, and she has the sweetest personality. I'd never ridden anyone that young or green before, so she's the perfect first baby. My main focus was to get her into a consistent program, which I was more than happy to do, but there were also some other little things that I wanted her to get used to, like baths, trails, and bareback riding, so that she's ready for a kid. By September, I was riding Maeve 5 times a week. Her transitions had really improved, and we were jumping small cross-rail courses. We also got the good news that though Zeus's recovery was going slowly, he was healing well and making progress. With Maeve being so young, there are a few things we had to work through. She was wiggly, difficult to steer, and tended to let her mind float in the clouds a little bit, which was fine until there was a jump in front of us. But every lesson I could feel her learning and improving so much. Her flat work was growing stronger too, and it wasn't long until she was learning walk to canter transitions and flying changes, though we have yet to master the flying changes. So I continued hand walking Zeus and riding just Maeve through the summer and fall, and then at the end of November, Zeus finally got cleared to be ridden. We started with just walking and adding more and more time each week to build his strength back up. At the end of December, we started trotting and again took it slow, starting with just a few minutes and increasing over time. So that brings us up to today and my most recent rides on Maeve and Zeus. Right now, Zeus is trotting for 10 minutes, and it won't be long until we're cantering and jumping again too. I'm hoping to show him again this year, but honestly, I'm just so grateful that we've made it this far. Maeve is doing better than ever. She is so much more confident in jumping courses and so improved in her flat work. She feels a lot less green than she was. I'll continue to ride her and do my best with training her to be ready for a kid for the next little while, and then she'll move on. As of right now, Zeus is well on his way to making a full recovery, and Maeve has such a bright future ahead of her that I'm so grateful to be a part of. I hope to keep riding as much as possible this coming year, but I'll be heading off to university in the fall, so after that, who knows. But don't worry, I would never give up horses for good because they are my life, and also my motivation for literally everything I do. Before I end the video, I just wanted to say that I am extremely lucky to have been given all the opportunities that I have. I think a lot of the time we as equestrians fail to remember just how fortunate we are to even get to be around horses. There are so many little kids out there who would just do anything to be able to ride and be around horses. We are truly so privileged to get to live this life. And to all of the people who helped me along the way, I'm so grateful that you are in my life and you've helped shape the rider and the person I am today. Thank you guys for coming along with me on this journey.